Okay, so the picture is a poor economy, indebted, low growth, loss of trust. Let's now look at the kind of attraction of the populists. And it starts with that sense of completely turning a new page, I think. So the questions I have, the first question I have about them is, do they represent the past or do they represent the future? And Bardella is a very interesting example of this. I mean, he's 30 years old. He's got 2 million followers on TikTok. And let's look at one of his posts. They are actually, it's a very young gang of people around him. Now, Sophie, when you and Zanny went to see him, what do you think? Was he the past or was he the future?
What's so striking, and I think Zanny and I discussed this afterwards, after seeing him last week, is that his sort of discourse is now incredibly upbeat. It's about the future. He talks about AI. He talks about cloud computing. He's got a whole kind of talk as a pro-growth discourse, which is astonishing in many respects. And I think the reason that works for people, it's not just young people. It's interesting in that clip, that was very much the young people. I mean, he's a bit of a celebrity, but and we have, yet to see whether that really translates into votes, but he is popular, is the sort of authenticity. He's been coached to smile, and he does it on cue, almost, in conversations. And he used to be a very timid, shy teenager. But to me, it's this it's authenticity that works in politics. It's hard to define. You know it when you see it, and he's got it.
And I mean, Farage has that as well in spades, right? He's a very different character. And he's much older and he's of a different generation, but he didn't have to be taught how to smile. We tried to find a picture of him not smiling and it was really hard.
We did find one eventually. It was good though. Sasha, I was going to ask you about Farage because in his speech there seemed to me a real tension. He was at once saying he wanted the UK to be like Singapore on Thames, deregulated, big role for the city. At the same time, he is harking back to a kind of racially much purer a UK that's kind of got old conservative, socially conservative values. And his electorate is quite socially conservative. So how do you reconcile these two bits?
Well, I mean, that's what makes him such a successful politician, Ed. Like, you don't logically, and yet he manages. So the speech you mentioned, indeed, in the City of London this week, he managed to sound like quite a fiscally sensible grown-up, which for us is a change.
So let's listen to a bit of that, because he does something else there, which I think is also a characteristic of these parties, which is, as they seem to get closer to power, they also moderate. And this is an example of that.
We want to cut taxes, of course we do. But we understand substantial tax cuts, given the dire state of debt and our finances, are not realistic at this current moment in time.
How big a change is that?
Well, I mean, Labour will have looked at that and gone, oh, this was our big card. Our big card was to say he's fiscally irresponsible. He's got all these pipe dreams. I mean, other than all the migration stuff, he's got all these pipe dreams. They're completely unfunded. We have written very critically about that and done the sums and said he's going to totally tank the bond market. This is smart.
But the problem is it's all kind of snake oil, isn't it? They say, we're going to fix everything, but they don't really explain how they're going to do it.
And Zanny, Alice Weidel, I mean, Goldman Sachs banker. This is not a person I imagined to be running the AFD.
So very, very interesting. This was the first time I met Alice Weidel yesterday. Unfortunately, the conversation was on background, so I can't tell you exactly what she said. But she was, again, she appears extremely friendly. She's an Economist subscriber. Her office had a whole pile of economists there. And she wanted to portray a party that was a normal party. She was very much trying to portray it as such, and we had a really interesting conversation about everything, her views on all kinds of things. But I think there is an important difference between the AfD and the other two. Not only that the Germans have this Brandmauer, which is the firewall where nobody will work with them, but actually it is a party that still has some seriously extremist people in it. I mean, people very much beyond the pale of liberal democratic politics. And they have not been booted out of the party. They are still in the party. It's a broad tent, but there are certainly a number of them who are nothing other than sort of hardline, very, very dangerous extremists. And the other is, if you look at the manifesto that the Alternative für Deutschland, the AfD, had in the election campaign earlier this year, it was still pretty extreme on various, calling to leave the euro, a very, it was not a sort of particularly, moderated set of demands.
Are they going to moderate enough to get the most growth possible? And I think there are two parts to that. One is the obvious area of growth is Europe, and in European integration, deepening capital markets, single market reform. But both of these parties, AfD and RN, are not very comfortable with that. So how do we feel about their willingness to compromise on the subject of Europe in order to get growth? Zanny, start with you.
I think their view of what gets you growth is completely different, Ed. I don't think they think of it in the way that you've just described it. For them, Europe is the problem. The European Union and its regulations are the problem. Now, that doesn't mean in the case of Bardella and the RN that they want to ditch the euro or that they want to ditch the EU, but they see it very much as a sort of 1980s, 1990s, yesterday's organization that is kind of smothering Europe in red tape and preventing it from achieving its potential. And in Germany, ditto. And so I think for them, they would say, actually, we do want to get growth. We do want to allow our national economy to flourish. And the reason it can't is because of this whole problem with Europe. So they would sort of redefine the challenge completely differently, with, of course, quite serious consequences for the functioning of Europe if they were in power. But I don't think it's sort of right to say, would they get on with the program? Because they think the program of the EU right now is the problem.
No. The idea of getting agreement between them and the rest of the EU countries to do any of those things seems vanishingly remote. But the opposite will happen. They'll just be arguing and fighting over everything.
Sophie?
Yes, I mean, the way I see it is that if you had the RN in power in France, a founder member of the European Union, key partner for Germany, the two countries that essentially, when they agree, things move, and when they don't, nothing happens. If they were in power in France, you would see almost every element of policy, all the sorts of things that we believe in, that you've identified, they would be challenging it and trying to unpick it. So yes, as Zanny said, quite rightly, they don't anymore want to leave. There's no talk of Frexit. There's certainly no talk of pulling out of the euro. But every single policy point, I mean, from, participation in the EU electricity pricing mechanism but paying into the EU budget, all of these things they want to start picking apart. So you would have a kind of an operator, a major power in the heart of Europe trying to pick it all apart. And that's what makes it dangerous.
Does this make sense? If you want to grow, I understand what you're saying, Zanny, about European regulation, and it was obviously a big theme of Brexit. But these countries are part of the euro. They're integrated into Europe in all sorts of important regulatory ways. If you start saying, we just don't like this, we're going to go our own way on this regulation, because they're already half in.
But that was the whole appeal of Brexit. And what happened? They didn't do any of the things they said they were going to do.
Zanny, go ahead.
When I hear you say that, I think, and I'd be thinking, what would Bardella say to that? And they would basically say, look, we need to shake up the EU so that it works better for France. And I suspect the AfD would say the same. It's that they think that the shake-ups that they will do will improve things for their country. So Bardella was very clear, no longer it's not reasonable to have the current power electricity system because basically France is supporting Germany. In fact, he said the EU is an association in defense of Germany's interests. He sees it, the EU, as an entire organization that's basically set up. And I think the Germans, frankly, the German populist nationalists see the mirror image. So one thing that's really struck me, having seen two of them now, is that, we talk about the populist nationalists as a sort of collective. They are so diametrically opposed to each other that actually you would have the greatest chaos was if you had them near or close to power in more than one country, because the French, the RN, I think, thinks of Germany as the real problem. Germany is the reason that the EU is messed up for France. And one of the other things that he said is worth citing, and Sophie, correct me if I got it a bit wrong, but he basically laid out a fiscal path. He said, yes, we have to have spending cuts. Yes, we have to have a fiscal path, but we essentially can't cope with the amount of debt we've got to repay. And he basically said to us that he would go to the ECB and ask the ECB to help with it in the same way that they'd helped with the euro crisis. It was very striking that that's the direction I think they're going to push.